Welcome to another video from ExplainingComputers.com. This time I'm going to explain what you need to do if you're thinking of switching from Windows to Linux. This includes thinking about applications, selecting a distro, testing, installation, and wider migration. So let's go and get started. There are many possible reasons to switch to Linux. These include wanting to learn new skills, to stop using Windows because you're unhappy with it, to have more control over your operating system, to bring old hardware back into use, to keep using a computer with no official Windows 11 support, or to embrace free and open source software. All of these reasons are valid, and how important one or more of them is to you is likely to determine how successful your switch to Linux will be. This is because in computing we often have to lose to win. Or, in other words, we often have to accept that some things will get worse in order to make other things better, and this is almost always the case when switching from Windows to Linux. For example, you probably won't be able to run all of the same software. And if you can't accept this, you're not going to have a happy and successful Linux experience. So let's focus a bit more on the software transition. Linux does not natively run Windows applications such as Microsoft Word, Excel, and Microsoft Edge. So, before you switch to Linux, it's sensible to check if you'll be comfortable using the available software. The good news is that almost all Linux applications are free and open source. Many of the most popular are also available for Windows, with these including the LibreOffice Suite, the Chromium Chrome and Firefox web browsers, the Thunderbird email client, the GIMP photo editor, the Critter painting package, the Inkscape drawing application, the Audacity audio editor, the Kdenlive video editor, and the Blender 3D creation tool. So, one of my best pieces of advice if you're thinking of switching to Linux is to install in Windows whichever FOSS applications are relevant to your computing activities and to try them out. And if you're able to work with these programs as an alternative to Windows-only software, your migration to Linux will be much easier. It's also worth being aware that any application that runs in a web browser will work in Linux. So, if like me, you spend a lot of time using cloud software like Google Docs, Microsoft 365 web apps, and Photopea, then once again you'll find it far easier to switch to Linux. All of this noted, there are ways to run at least some Windows applications on a Linux system. I've detailed these methods in my video, Running Windows Programs on Linux, and I'm also going to return to this topic on the channel fairly soon. So, if you do rely on a specific Windows application, then all is not always lost. But, once again, I'd advise investigating the possibilities before switching to Linux. Finally, I'd note that if you're a gamer, what you're able to play will be a lot more constrained. However, things are improving with, for example, Steam for Linux now providing access to over 2,900 games. Oh, and despite what some people claim, it is possible to watch streaming services like Netflix and Disney Plus in Linux, as I regularly do myself. Once you've considered applications, it's time to choose a Linux distribution or distro from the hundreds that are available. All distros are based on the Linux kernel, which is the core component of the operating system. The Linux kernel interfaces directly with the computer hardware, contains the drivers for most peripherals, and is technically the only thing that's actually called Linux. In addition to the kernel, all distros also include many other software components, such as a bootloader, display server, desktop environment, and some pre-installed applications. If you're switching from Windows to Linux, the distros I personally recommend are Linux Mint Cinnamon Edition, Zorin OS or Ubuntu. All of these include a browser, media players and LibreOffice, and I've made a video about each of them in 2024 as they've all recently launched a new edition. Both Linux Mint and Zorin OS are easy for Windows users to learn as they have a familiar right menu. Meanwhile, Ubuntu takes a somewhat different approach but is still pretty straightforward. Before you switch to Linux, and to help you decide on a distro, it's wise to test things out using a live USB drive. To make one of these, we need to download an appropriate ISO file for our chosen distro. So, for example, here on the Zorin OS website, we can click on Download Zorin OS, and we'll scroll down to the free Zorin OS core and click on Download. And as I don't want to resubscribe to the mailing list, I'll just click on Skip to download, and there we are, we can download the file. And as you can see, I in fact have already downloaded it, and as it's 3.2 gigabytes in size, I won't download it again. Next, we need to use an imaging utility to write the ISO to a USB drive. And here I've already got a USB drive plugged in, and a drive with 8 gigabytes or more capacity should be fine for any Linux distro. And do note that writing the ISO file to the USB drive will delete all other data from it. Next, here in Windows, let's run up the free imaging application Balena Etcher, which can be downloaded from etcher.balena.io. And here all we need to do is to select our ISO file, like that. There we go. We'll check we've got the USB drive selected as the correct one, has to be here, it's the only drive we've got, and we can now click on Flash. And Windows will check we want to do it. Yes, we do. And Etcher will get on writing and verifying our live USB drive. Note that other imaging programs are also available, such as Rufus, and there's also a utility called Ventoy, which allows multiple ISOs to be put on one drive if you want to test out many distros. And I've covered Ventoy in another Explaining Computers episode. But here, Etcher will do the job just fine, so let's speed on through until it's finished. There we are, and we'll now close down Etcher and restart the computer so we can test out Zorin OS. Next, we need to encourage our computer to boot from a USB drive, and on this particular laptop, I'm pressing the Escape key to access a boot menu. But different computers use different boot menu keys, including F8, F11 and F12. Alternatively, you might first have to enter the BIOS to boot from a USB drive, so what I'm going to do is to leave some further instructions from booting from a USB drive down in the video description, and here select our USB drive, and very quickly we've got this menu where we can try and install Zorin OS. So I'll press enter, like that, and the boot process will now be fairly slow because Zorin OS is booting from a USB drive rather than a hard drive or an SSD. So we'll speed on through until something occurs. And here we are with the option to try or install Zorin OS. So I'll click on try. Yoda would not be happy. And here we are on the Zorin OS desktop, where, so we can see things more clearly on video, I'm going to go to the menu and settings, and we'll go down to displays, where I'm going to turn on fractional scaling and select a scale factor of 175%, which is what I'd use on this laptop anyway. And there we are, we'll keep our changes, and hopefully we can now see things a bit easier on the screen. And as you can see, what we have here looks pretty like Windows. We've got at the bottom what's called a panel in Linux, it's called a taskbar in Windows, and on it we've got things like a software store, we've got access to a file manager, which looks like, well, a file manager, we've got the Firefox web browser, and we've got a menu which has got various things pre-installed, not least including LibreOffice, as I was talking about earlier. And here you could spend lots of time going around and getting used to Linux, but I would suggest there's a few key things you really should check. Firstly, if you're working on a laptop like I am here, and I'll just press that button so you can see I'm working on a laptop, the first thing to check is that your trackpad actually works. Here clearly the trackpad does work, so that's that's fine. And the next thing to be checked is whether Wi-Fi can work, because currently we're not online. So let's go down here in Zorin OS, click there and click there next to Wi-Fi and select a network and enter its password. There we go. And things seem to be happening down here. Yes, Wi-Fi clearly works on this computer. And let's just prove it. Let's go to the web. Very exciting. Remember, everything's running here from a USB drive. That's lovely, Firefox. I really don't care. Let's just go to ExplainingComputers.com. Yes, this machine is most definitely online. Next, let's test out whether a printer works. And over here, I've got my laser printer sitting on the floor in the studio just for this video. So I'll turn it on. You can probably hear it in the background coming to life there. And we'll go back to the shot where you can see the laptop, and I'll plug in the laser printer like this. There we are, it's plugged in, and we'll go back to the desktop and we will wait a minute, because it should be the case if the printers recognize everything is sorted out automatically. There we are, it's configuring a new printer, and we'll speed on through. And it's now searching for drivers. And once again, we'll fast forward time. And now it's requesting additional drivers. And there we are. Our printer has been added automatically here in Linux. And it is worth noting though that because we're running from a live USB drive, when we next boot from this drive, it won't be added in. All we're doing here is testing. This could be done if you actually install Linux. But the printer is down here. It should be no problems at all. There's printers, and in there we've got our printer, which is cool. And let's just prove it works. Always worth doing that. Let's go back to the web. Shall we print this page? Shall we see if it's going to work? We'll go to, well, print, Christopher. That's probably the thing to do. There we are. Let's not save to PDF. Let's actually print to the printer and print. Very exciting. There we are. The printer's making a different noise. Here it says printing has been completed, but no, it's just come to life. And yes, there we are. A page has come out the printer, which if we flick it over, is clearly ExplainingComputers.com. So in terms of the basic testing, we've done trackpad, Wi-Fi and printer. And you may also want to do Bluetooth, webcam, scanner, things like that, if you've got them on your system. But for now, I'm going to turn the printer off because it makes background noise. And note that whilst running a distro from a live USB drive is very useful to test that Linux will work on your hardware, if you want to spend some time learning Linux, another option is to set up virtual machines. For example, if we go across to this computer, here in Windows 10, I've installed VirtualBox 7. And if we run it up, you can see that I've installed Linux Mint and Ubuntu. So if we select one of these, let's go for Linux Mint, it will boot up as a guest virtual machine inside our Windows host operating system. And creating one or more virtual machines is a great way to allow you to become more familiar with Linux, is faster and usually more convenient than booting from a USB drive, and poses no risk of corrupting Windows on your computer, as could happen if you set up a dual boot system. Explaining exactly how virtual machines are set up is a topic beyond the scope of this video. But I'll be posting another Explaining Computers episode very soon that will detail running Linux in Windows. Greetings! Having considered applications, created a live USB drive and tested Linux on our hardware, it's now time for an installation. And I thought I'd start this segment back here in Windows just to provide a reminder that before you replace Windows with Linux on a computer, you need to copy all of your files from folders like Documents and Downloads and Music, Pictures and Videos. Because when we replace Windows on this computer, everything will be deleted. And so, with this point noted, let's say goodbye to Windows and once again boot from our USB drive. Let's restart And on this system, I need to press F9 on boot, which will get us to a boot menu. There we are, where we can select our Zorin USB drive. And once again, we've got the option to try or install Zorin OS. And as you might have noted, there's also an option here to try and install Zorin OS using modern NVIDIA drivers. So if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, this is the option to choose to install Zorin OS. But here we are, select the first option. And once again, we now have the option to try or install. So I'll click on Install Zorin OS and selecting our language, and then taking the defaults here for updates and other software. After which we get the option to either install Zorin OS alongside Windows or to erase the disk and install Zorin OS. And here I'm going to go with the second option, to erase the disk and install Zorin OS, which will remove Windows from this computer, as problems can occur with dual boot systems following Windows updates, just as they did in August 2024. But if you're interested in a dual boot, I cover best practice in yet another video. But for here, we'll now continue without a dual boot and click on Install Now, and then press Continue to confirm that's really what we want to do. We then have to tell the system where we are in the world. The default here is fine. We have to create an account. This is just a local account on this computer. And there we go, Zorin OS 17 is now being installed to replace Windows. And all we now need to do is to restart now, remove our USB drive, and press Enter. And in theory, our computer should now reboot into Linux, which it has. So we'll just log in. And here we are with a fresh install of Zorin OS 17, where, as you can see, if we want, we can take a tour, but I think we will skip the tour because for me, it's now time for a cup of tea. So, here we are on our computer with Windows replaced with Linux, where, as you can see, I've made some scaling changes. I've selected a dark theme, and I've also chosen another desktop wallpaper. As part of your migration, you'll also need to copy any data you backed up to an external drive to the appropriate user folders here in Linux. And there may also be printers and other hardware to install, as I demonstrated earlier. You may also need to add some more software, which can be done easily using a graphical installer in most mainstream Linux distros. Here's the one in Zorin OS, where, for example, we could search for the GIMP photo editor, and there it is, like that. And to install it, guess what? We just click on Install. And as usual, we'll speed forward in time to the point where the software is installed on our system. And it wants to load the app details there. I'm going to go away from that. I always want to check it's there in the menu. Let's go back to Menu and Graphics. And there we are, GNU Image Manipulation Program. It's coming up. It's been installed here in Zorin OS. And for more setup tips, you may also want to check out some of my other Linux guides, including Linux Mint Tips and Tricks, Linux Tips for MS Office users, and the third episode in my Linux Survival Guide on GPU drivers and printing. Hopefully you've found this video useful if you're thinking of switching from Windows to Linux. And my key message, as I hope you've gathered, is testing. Try things out first. Don't end up being someone who installs Linux on your computer and then discovers you're not happy with the available software, or that, for example, your Wi-Fi doesn't work. Make sure things are going to work and you're comfortable with where you're going to be before you switch. Because, as I said back in the first segment of this video, often when we make changes in computing today, we have to lose to win. Some things will be better if you switch to Linux, some things will be worse. You've got to weigh that up before you commit. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.